Hi, everybody. I was motivated to make this video partly as just to record some thoughts and also for possible advice to any filmmakers out there or artists in general. And this is all brought about by the fact that I'm currently reconstructing one of my older films right next to me. And in the act of doing that, a lot of these thoughts came up for me. And I recall a story that somebody told me about the pioneer filmmaker D.W. Griffith, who was at the Museum of Modern Art where a print of his film Intolerance was being shown. But this was some, I guess, close to 20 years after he had made it. And so anyway, the person who told me this, I think it was his story. Anyway, he walked into the projection room while the film was unwinding to see Griffith at the editing table frantically cutting stuff because he wanted to recut it, that he thought it needed to be recut. And he was stopped by the guy who telling me the story and other people. But it gets at one of the central problems in the arts of knowing when enough is enough. Now, I am as guilty of this as anybody. I remember back when I used to work for the Criterion Collection as an editor, as text editor and producer, that I used to drive the designers crazy because I would rewrite and rewrite and rewrite the copy that would go on the jacket of the Laserdisc we were producing so many times that they more or less had to redo their work all the time. And so I'm definitely guilty of this. And it is a problem, but as has been said by different people about different arts, no work of art is ever completed. It is only abandoned. And so what I'd like to talk about is both that question of abandoning a work and also the whole notion of possibly reconstructing it like what I'm doing with my movie. So I think maybe to start with, you can talk about what could be called the discipline to abandon. And this is a tough one because revision is absolutely necessary in the arts. And very few people in writing, for example, can write a perfect first draft. Now, in the world of journalism and in most publication, that's handled by the fact that what you read is not really the first draft. It's not the raw draft. It's gone through editing, usually by another person. But unfortunately, for a self-publisher like myself and perhaps most of you out there, you don't have that conscience behind you. You've got to make the judgment for yourself. And it is possible to overwork things. And at the same time, it's also possible not to work it enough. So you have to develop these habits of discipline, if you will, where you abandon the work, in my case, most frequently with writing, but it doesn't have to be just writing. Now, talking about writing for a moment, for those of you who might read my blog, I deliberately, when starting that blog, restricted each entry to 500 words. And in addition to that, I will allow myself to revise and to revise, but I publish at WordPress, and WordPress actually stops counting your revisions after 25. I frequently get all the way up to 25, and that's sort of like an imposed limitation from WordPress. Now, you can continue revising, but it's effectively a warning telling you, you've gone over this 25 times, which is probably more than enough. So that helps to abandon something, but that will always be there as a temptation to go back and to rework, which gets into what I'm doing with this video. Now, what I'm doing is a reconstruction, which is to say I'm rebuilding from the camera originals to get something akin to what I published, we won't say how long ago, let's just say a while ago. Now, this raises lots of issues because how do you, you could almost argue that reconstruction is almost the opposite of revision because you're trying to get to something that's already been completed. And the goal being presumably to have a frame-to-frame correlation between what I do now and what I did before. Now, you could argue, though, that by doing that, you're not really reproducing the original. You're going back using the tools you now have, but in between when I first did it and what I'm doing now comes a lot of time, experience, and new technology. And in fact, I probably am going to allow myself one major change because it was something that I wanted to do back when I originally published it, but I didn't have the technical means of doing it, whereas I do now. And so I figure, like, in that sense, I'm kind of fully completing it. But can there really be a complete reconstruction? Won't you always be changing? And if that is the truth, that no matter how hard you try, is it really necessary to even try to do that? Can you, in fact, just say, okay, I'm just going to go back and redo it? Now, I don't want to redo this video completely. Believe me, I do not want to do that. But the question then becomes, okay, a second version, it can be a radical reworking of it. Is that now a new movie? Is it a version of the old one? Are they two separate things? Are they two takes on the same material? And if you're going to go that far, okay, speaking of takes, well, I have alternate takes from a lot of the stuff I shot and I didn't use, obviously. So should I start using those? Will those be better? There's no end to it. So you really have to have a sense of what your end goal is. In this particular case, I had fairly concrete reasons for wanting to do this reconstruction, which I won't get into. Let's just say that I can meet those and be more or less content with the end result. But that's unusual. Normally, when you go back to something that you've done before, it's with the idea that you want to change things. And so I will close with a confession, which is that to a certain extent, I can't help wondering how much any of this is an issue for me, only because I really hate the idea of repetition. And to go back to reconstruct something, well, I'm going back over old work. And I feel like this temptation that I have to justify this to myself by doing something new with it. When in fact, I'm probably be doing a greater service by being as true as possible to the original, which is what I force myself to do.